It is Thursday, March 14th. We are in Ezra Nechemiah, Ezra chapter 4, verse 17. We have, last week, read through the letter, the Aramaic letter, with much to be talked about. And we'll see if we get all the way to chapter 4. We'll get to chapter 5, but I have something else to hand out as well. Chapter 17. Kobe, you want to read first?
Verse 17.
Oh, I'm sorry, verse 17. Thank you. Oh, a side note. I don't know if it can be a digression before we officially start, and this will be captured on tape. But once I mentioned Ezra, all sorts of fun things have been happening in other places. Khalil Muhammad, professor of Islamic Studies at San Diego State, is doing this whole thing on sort of written versus oral in Islamic traditions and about how they know. It has led to a whole conversation that he and I are still having about written versus read. And it's really fun, by the way, that we're not in Nehemiah 8 yet, which will be the reading of the Torah. But we say reading, but the biblical word for reading, or in some ways, not to overly cringe, but even the modern Hebrew word for reading doesn't mean reading the same way that we mean it in English.
Reading.
It means calling out. It's loud. And it's fun because it led to a whole conversation about, if you jump ahead to Nehemiah chapter 8, if you jumped ahead to Ezra chapter 8, verse 8, which someday we will get to. Actually, we're moving pretty quickly here, so I'm not overly concerned. No, it's not there. Never mind. It is Nehemiah. I just don't have it. Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 8. That is the only biblical reference to sacred text and the word mikra, which becomes one of the common rabbinic terms for it. But that's not what he reads from. He reads from the, I think, Sefer Torah HaElohim, in Nehemiah 8, but the people Vayavinu Hamikra or Vayavinu Bamikra, I forget the preposition, but he uses the term Mikra. Everywhere else, Mikra really means to call out loud. Now there it means call out loud, but the issue between reading and calling out loud in biblical text is really a neat one, very important to Khalil Muhammad as it relates to Quranic studies, Quran coming from, arguably from the same root. Anyway, so that's one fascinating thing. And then when the Risa Levitt Cohen, who's now kind of following up her doctoral dissertation on Ezekiel, I think I said before she wrote on Ezra, she wrote on Ezekiel, having to do specifically with where God gets found and the finding of God in text and issues of Second Temple Judaism, which we come to Ezra because we're pushing the clock back from the 1st century to the book of Daniel in the 2nd century before the Common Era, to then the whole Persian period, here the beginning of the Persian period. And she's coming at it in the other direction, but asking very similar questions. So I think as we move forward at some point, we're going to invite her and do a piece on how Ezekiel sets the stage for the Persian period. Not the geopolitical stage, because the Persians do that, but some of the other stages. Yes?
Lots of Mikra Kodesh,
Yeah.
Yom Haru Mikra Kodesh,
Exactly.
and so on in the Torah.
Correct.
And then there's one in Isaiah, Kro Mikra Lo Uchal.
Correct.
I don't see, so it's probably with a preposition or something, because those are very strange.
Oh, look in
searches.
Nehemiah 8. I mean, you can find it in the Bible.
And I have, ויקרא בספר תורת האלוהים, יום ביום מן היום הראשון עד היום האחרון, ויעשו חג 7 ימים, וביום השמיני עצרת כמשפט.
Oh, it's not in there?
He might use the word mikra.
In verse 8.
In
Nehemiah 8.
chapter 8. Oh, verse 8. ויקראו בספר תורת האלוהים מפורש בשום שכל, ויבינו במקרא.
I was going to say, I found it and then I didn't find it.
No,
It's the right place.
What I'm saying is, I missed the preposition, the bamikra.
Bamikra.
And that's
Yeah,
why I
like-
couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Okay, you're
Anyway,
right. Of course you're right.
it's a very cool
Vayavinu
understanding.
bamikra.
One of the things that Ruth often points out is, her first association generally in Hebrew language is in modern Hebrew, go and figure. And I'm mixed. Sometimes I make modern associations, but often I make biblical associations. And then we have all the associations we make in English. And the word families in English are not necessarily the same family of words and meanings in other languages, especially when we get out of Western European languages. Anyway, all that by way of background, just to say, I hope that you're doing lots of thinking and reading and so forth as we move forward. I'm sorry, Kobe, I interrupted you before you started. Chapter 4, verse 17.
They sent the king an answer to Rehum the chancellor, and to Shimshai the scribe, and to the rest of their companions who lived in Samaria, and to the rest beyond the river, peace and now.
Okay. So not only did we make a transition before as it relates to the letter, going back to 8, but we're in language, but we're still in Aramaic. All right? So now we get the response to the letter or letters. Remember, we had 2 letters last week. One was just mentioned and one we had spelled out. And here we get the response. Okay? Same list of people. Again, people of official standing within the Persian Empire. Those who wrote the letter and now those to whom the king responds. Anything else? All right, let's push ahead. 18.
The letter which you send to us has been plainly read before me.
See, and so even there, right, it's Mifarash Keri. Okay.
Yeah.
Kadamai.
I didn't read it. It was read to me.
Yeah. So who's literate? Right, that's Khalil's issue in terms of...
except this one.
Yeah?
It says read to me in
The
translation.
old one says, or this one says that it's been translated.
Right, that's the Mifarash.
Right.
And what does the old one say?
But she didn't say translated in what she read.
I'm reading from a different...
I know.
Oh.
I'm just saying that translated. The old one just says, peace, and now the letter which ye sent unto us hath been plainly read before me. So
Stone says has been read explicitly before me.
Good.
So where is it said translated?
in
JPS.
in the newer
JPS.
JPS.
Nice. But again, one of the issues that's here is an issue of translation, is the issue of language. So however we want to however we want to translate the Mifarash, the idea is the king can't understand it without perush, without explanation. So whether that explanation specifically means translation, which I think makes the most sense, or something else. But the issue of being able to read and understand is part and parcel of the letter that was sent. Remember, we switched languages. And now of the king in his response, acknowledging that it was read to him in a way that was made clear to him, elucidated. I like that the JPS knows that it was translated from Aramaic to Persian.
Right.
We must have gone and watched the YouTube videos. All right, 19.
And I commanded, and search has been made, and it was found that this city in old times rebelled against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been made in it.
Good. So that part of the charge has been substantiated.
Min yomat alma. Here in old times.
Does it say have been made?
I don't like this translation.
You
It's
said
not
have been
in
made
old
in
time,
it,
it's from
Koba?
old times.
Is that
Right.
what it says?
Say, I'm sorry?
What was the word you used? Have been made in
It
it?
says from earliest
Or-
time.
Rebellion have been made in it?
So not in the...
Because this says have been rife.
Right. So it's mitabed ba, meaning that it was done there.
Happening.
It's almost like the soil sponsors
Correct.
or something.
Correct.
What?
That the soil.
Right.
That there's something about the local
It's
water.
indigenous in the,
Yeah.
something about the Jews and the land there that
And it,
combined they have trouble.
right, and in the earlier JPS it says that this city of old time hath made insurrection against kings, and the rebellion and sedition have been made therein.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Min yomat alma al malchim mitnas'a.
What did you like about old, Ruth?
No, I didn't like
From
the
one I-
preposition. in Kova's translation, it says in old times.
Right.
Oh, okay.
It's definitely
So-
not in old time. It's ever.
It's
from
the-
old time
correct.
until today.
Correct.
Old times
Yeah,
and beyond,
It
and
has a
until now.
reputation.
From then till now,
Yeah.
rather
It has a
than just it
reputation.
happened then.
Yeah.
As from earliest times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only thing I didn't like, the preposition.
Good.
Nin yomat alma. And he feels like he needs to share it with those wonderful people. Yeah.
And the mighty kings have been over Jerusalem who ruled over all the countries beyond the river, and toll, tribute, and customs were paid to them.
Mm-hmm.
Good. So, again, this is the king reporting on the research that was done. It is a rebellious place and a place of power.
Oh, okay. Therefore make a decree that these men be made to cease, and that the city be not rebuilt until I shall give another decree.
So, a couple things there. Anybody want to react? First of all, in the simplest sense, what does so what's the king say to the commissioners?
You're right. You get what you wanted. You
You're
get
right,
what you asked
and
for.
you get what you want.
Well,
right?
but what's
Stop
interesting
voting.
is he tells them to make a decree rather than the king making a decree.
Good.
No, it said until I make it.
No, he says you
make
guys
a
issue an
decree.
order.
Now-
כי אנשימו תאם לבטלה. You guys,
I give you the authority.
Right, right.
Yeah.
correct.
Not the original.
Whereas originally the king had given them authority to build the temple.
Different king. We're going to come to that.
Wait,
Exactly.
we'll get to that.
No, I understand. We'll
Yeah,
get to
we'll
it.
get
we're
to
all
that.
agreeing
Because
with
the
you
earlier one, the king gave the authority. Here, he's giving the authority to someone else to make
Yeah.
the order.
to make the statement. Though he's telling them what to say.
Right, until.
People complain.
But yeah, say that
so he
again,
says,
Lois.
"You're right."
Until a decree is issued by
Yeah.
I
He-
don't quite
he-
get it that way either.
Why?
The statement, it's interesting in terms of the latter part of the verse, because do we read him as saying that tell them to stop, you tell them to stop, and then nobody can start again until I say so? That is,
Oh,
or is he saying that at some point I'm going to say they can start again? Right? The ambiguity in the language, the ambiguity of the language that ad mini tama yitzam, until I say so, is either a fiat. Nobody does anything, without my permission.
למה anything?
Or-
הקריה הזאת לא תיבנה. He says exactly what he's stopping.
the city.
And the city
Odd.
will not be built
Odd.
until I say so.
Correct. No. But there's a
What's that
he's
mean?
asking a different question.
What's
Until
that
or
mean?
unless.
They're correct. Until or unless, perhaps in English. But there are two different ways, I believe, to inflect and understand that statement. One is sort of over my dead body. Nobody does it until I say so, meaning it's done. Or he has a sense that the day is going to come when I say so. We're putting a break this until I say that it's time to start building again. Right? I think that the language supports either tone of voice, either the over my dead body, right? That I am the only one who could ever change this, versus someday I will change this. But until I do, it's on a height. On the one hand, it's dead in the water, or on the other side of the water. And on the other hand, it is, it's the king is giving it a hiatus until he will decide to resume it.
Right,
But the
and the
possibility of
translation here is until a decree shall be made by me, which is more your second.
the second,
Unt-
that it will be done.
And when I read this one first on my own, I read it that, they can't
Well,
build
then you
until I
did-
tell them they can.
Right, which
Which
has
means
said
there
my
might
dead
be,
body.
what
Oh.
doesn't have over my dead
Oh,
body.
the other reading.
Right.
Okay, I'm open to both readings, but they're really different in terms of the intention of the letter. That the letter stops the building now is clear. Whether the intention of the letter is that it's basically stopped forever, or that this is now some kind of cooling off period for whatever reason.
I realize that it's very hard to interpret something, and I agree. But you don't have any fun if you don't argue a little bit over the words. Now these words here, in the context, it says powerful kings have ruled over, and they got some real benefit from it. These taxes were all paid and so on and so forth. And then he says, so stop now, and maybe we'll start again later, or until I say start again later, or whatever. So perhaps he's looking at it as it may be very profitable. He retained that discretion because he wants to, get all those taxes and everything out of there eventually. And they say powerful kings are able to do it, so he wants to be able to be sure to assert the power
Nice.
before he can do it.
Nice. It's within his interest to make sure his authority is there, that there's a wealth that's there
Yeah, to
tap it, but to be done in a way that doesn't breed the rebellious power.
And this translation of the last sentence goes along with what Harvey was saying. That's a very different translation than this one here.
Last sentence meaning the one we just read, or the one we're about to
22,
read?
the one we're about
I want you to go ahead and read it.
So, take care not to be lax in this matter, or there will be much damage and harm to the kingdom, which is what it says in the new JPS. The old JPS said, and take heed that ye shall not slack herein. Why should damage grow to the hurt of the kings? Which is different than harm to the damage to the kingdom. I mean, very different.
It's funny, and in fairness, that word kings versus kingdom is the same word that is used 2 or 3 times up above and has always been translated as kings. Verse 19, right? Al-Malchin. And I think I read it a couple of times.
Looks like
In the beginning of verse 20.
You also made last week notice of that.
looks like a good Aramaic plural to me.
It looks like it, which doesn't mean it couldn't be read as Malchut in a place, maybe, one could argue. But here you have within the same, the same run-on sentence, the same word used 3 times. And a translator who has made a choice to translate it differently one of the times.
And if you look at it that way, unless I am coming into this too late and not getting it, if you look at it that way in terms of take care not to be lax or there'll be much damage to the kingdom, or the kings, and you think, going back to what Harvey was saying, if we let them build now, before we have established our authority, then there's high risk to our authority. If we wait, maybe we can build that, and then it might not be so risky.
Where do you get the idea that the Persian Empire lacked authority over Yerushalayim? Where do you get that idea from?
Because, so one of the things...
They lacked authority.
Not that they lacked authority, but they don't want to be tested again by this people who is rife with rebellion.
As per this king who claimed that he found out that this is the case.
Right.
But his former king gave them permission to go and build.
Correct.
Yeah, well, he was a softie.
And there's no
Which
history.
we found out in 2 chapters.
Correct, but there'll be a span of
because
years.
they're going to do another research.
Correct, but there'll be a span of years. So one of the things, and again,
Yeah.
the dating of all of this is not complicated. It's functionally impossible. And people don't agree. It just is.
Yeah,
but the reports from Ezra to the book of Nechemiah to the prophet Haggai and Zechariah all report the start and a cessation of building. Okay, so if we looked at all the parallel texts every week, we would move very slowly. So it's my intention that we're going to move at least through the book of Ezra. And then probably when we do Nehemiah, because much of what we'll read in Nehemiah, we're going to refer back to what we had already learned, that'll be a nice time to bring Haggai and Zechariah relevant then as we're looking at the stuff for the second time. But they will all report that there is a start and a stop before the building really picks up, which will be the continuation in chapter 5 in a minute, in the time of Darius. And one of the things is during the reign, now don't quote me, in either Artaxerxes or Artaxerxes II, because the fact that there's no differentiation made here means that my mind doesn't lock onto it when I read it elsewhere. I think the first, but the Babylonians who have been conquered by the Persians rebel. And there's a Babylonian rebellion. And so the sense here is, we're reading a story, and it has that sense of stylized story, right? We had 2 letters that go together and so forth, and we have a sense of it being a stylized story because we have it miforash, we have it explained very clearly in Nehemiah, and it's different. And we have it referred to in Haggai, and it's a bit different, though the basic outline is the same. And so there's a sense that this is an explanation for why the building stopped, right? Not because the people weren't committed to it, not because it was too difficult, but because the local authorities, the first thing we saw was that the locals in general, but here the story is about the local authorities, the commissioners of the Persian Empire, are given permission to stop it or are told to stop it from there with a fear about rebellion. okay, and put it in the context, perhaps, of the Babylonians rebelling against the Persian Empire, and it becomes a nice story about the Persian Empire being worried about this upstart people that the Persian Empire never had to fight against, and but in the context of the Babylonian Empire, yeah, Kobin and Al.
I have a problem because they're building the temple, and these outsiders, these accusers, are talking about the walls of the city.
Well, we don't know what they're doing.
So if you go
Then
back,
they go back and say a little later, I noticed the term gets thrown back and forth. They stopped the building of the house of the Lord, not in the city.
correct. So if you go back, the original beginning of chapter 4, right? They're building the temple, and people want to come and help and say, no, you can't do it. And it goes from there. When you come to the middle of chapter 4, the complaint that's made against them is about building not the temple, but building the city, the walls and the foundation. So whether they were actually building the city and the walls, or whether that's the accusation to make the king feel threatened, don't know, but we'll look at the way it's presented in Nehemiah when we get there.
Right, and I assume it's easier to be rebellious if you're doing it from inside a walled city
Correct.
than if you're not. And so you would not, if in fact he believed that earlier, when there was a walled city, they were rebellious people, they didn't pay taxes, whatever, you could see why he wouldn't want them to build the walls.
Correct. Yep. I love the fact that in spite that all this has started because the Persians gave permission, I like that there's this complaint. We could compare it as well to Haman's complaint to Achashverosh about the Jews. Right? There's this people among you, right, who refuse to bow down, who are a rebellious people. That's Haman's charge in the book of Esther. And there we read it, and it looks just like an anti-Semitic charge, right? I mean, there's no basis within the story in terms of rebellion within the kingdom. But here we have an accusation of a city that has a history of rebellion. Now, makes you want to know who they rebelled against, so the Babylonian story and so forth. And in the context of telling a story not about that they won't bow down to me, but doing something that could be construed as a step towards rebellion or a step towards independence from the Persian city. But that would be another text to compare it to.
Said to mention that one of the accusations leveled against Jews from time immemorial has to do with money. Both Haman tries to convince Ahasuerus that if the Jews are killed, all of their property is going to become the king's ransom. And here they are telling the king that if these people are allowed to continue in what they're doing, they stop paying money, and the money is going to
about
be
the taxes.
missing, taxes and so on and so forth, is going to be missing from the king's coffers. It's really interesting that, I mean, the irony of the anti-Semitism leveled against Jews that has to do with money, and here both cases are trying to convince people to act against the Jewish people based on the fact that money
to get money.
Yeah, to get money.
Right, but there's a difference in saying kill them and all of their property will become ours, and saying don't let them build a walled city because every time these people build a walled city, they rebel.
I didn't say it's the same, but I think that the irony of money connected to why the Jews should be prevented, either from living or from continuing to do what they're allowed to do by the former king, has to do with
that's where
loss, monetary loss.
Correct, but
or monetary gain.
Correct, but that's where there's the disconnect, right? In terms of they were told they could build the house of the Lord. These people say they weren't just building the house of the Lord; they were building walls to the city. That's what they say. I'm not saying that's what happened.
We don't know that building the house of the Lord precludes
rebuilding
their houses so that they can live around this.
No, but rebuilding houses doesn't cause you to have to build a wall around the city.
All of it is based on assumption because they're made.
Never mind.
Right?
I don't want to take us too much away from the
It's a
text,
whole lot of
but
may.
as somebody who grew up in the country, I kind of have a feeling that when you're among people who don't like you, You don't only build houses, you also build walls.
Also a place, let's remember that we're in the far reach of the empire, first the Babylonian Empire, now the Persian Empire, and therefore the idea of not a strong local authority and therefore lawlessness is also associated. So it's a bunch of mays
Right,
about
exactly.
Yeah.
M-A-Y, S's, not M-A-Z-Es.
I guess I'm just saying, I'm not sure
Or
I
M-
necessarily see the same kind of anti-Semitism
Correct.
here
I,
as in the Haman story.
I'm going to agree with both of you. There is a definite distinction, and there is definitely some kind of, I don't know if it's a tragic irony, and I'll add the word tragic, the association in general between Jews and money, and here it's specifically where by doing some form of oppression, not murdering, but some form of oppression, not allowing them to do something, has monetary benefit for the kingdom. Right? And it's, you know, little they know that we control the banks.
And the media.
All right. Funny. No, it's tragic and sick. But I find I'll stick with my one-liner anyway.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Also, as long as we're talking about irony, the first word of verse 22.
He'll edit that out.
I won't edit that out. I like putting my anti-Semitic barbs in there. So you never know what kind of complaints I'll get. That's people view it. All right, 22.
Or people who will pick it up and use
Quote
it
me.
the other way, right?
Quote me on it. You can quote me on it.
Take care.
Moving forward, the first word of verse 22. Speaking of irony, uzahirin, be very, very careful. Right? He's telling them to be careful to do the thing that they wanted to do in the first place. It's like, Daddy, can we have dessert? Okay, I want you to have dessert, but be very careful that you have dessert. Right? King, we want you to look into this and to stop it. And the king says, okay, we're going to stop it. And you be very careful that you do, because it's really important. We know it's important. That's why we wrote you, because we want to do it. It's an irony in the verb.
And it's also the beginning and the ending of those letters is a wonderful, I don't know, again, it's narrative, it's stylized, whatever, but it's a wonderful example of the way diplomacy, so to speak, worked in those days, with all the
Flowery
honorifics
salutation.
and all the nice courtesy and whatever, and the ending is, and once I gave you the permission or the command to do it, be careful to execute it exactly as it should be done. You know, it's part of the stylized letter writing of those days too.
Could be. All right. And now we have let's go on. Somebody else reading? Marilyn? Go around this way.
When the text of the letter of King Artaxerxes was read before Rehum and Shimshai, the scribe, and their colleagues, they hurried to Jerusalem, to the Jews, and stopped them by main force.
Good.
Wow.
So the zeal, which seemed to have been what they wanted.
Do I get this correctly? That it was the Jews who had not left Jerusalem that they were stopping.
No, it's the Jews who came back. We don't know much about the
I thought it was
Jews
the other way
or the
around.
cousins who were there, but the Jews who came back were the ones who were building, whatever they were building.
Well, I thought they came back, that was their purpose.
Of course.
Correct. Exactly
Yes.
correct.
Of course.
All right, I'm not sure I'm answering your question. Let's try it again, Jackie.
Well, I mean, it's sort of like the purpose that the king first sent them back.
But it's a different king.
Different king.
Different
Well,
king.
not yet.
It is a different
It's
king.
a different group of people.
It is. We've gone from Cyrus to Artaxerxes.
Oh,
But
That's
remember
why they
the
had to send people to the archives to find out
correct.
that this kingdom, this city was already rebellious, and the letter that comes from Yerushalayim falls on very
well,
firm
that's
ground.
why it was destroyed.
They said also Artaxerxes didn't have any interest in Yerushalayim until now. It's a little
Correct.
city in the end of the empire. He's got other.
He's got bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, exactly. And all of a sudden he gets this letter from Yerushalayim, and he says, is that the case? So he sends somebody to the archives, and they find out that Yerushalayim is a rebellious place, and that we know is true.
Nobody argues
We
that
know.
point.
We know that.
We know it. He knows it is a given.
Yeah, so now he knows it too, and he says, now they're doing something else. I don't even know what they're doing, but let them stop.
Put a stop to it.
Yeah. And the people who are stopping them, some of them are the ones who never left, plus all the mobile exiles from other places that the Assyrians brought to
Right.
the land.
But the names that are associated to it, it's neat when people are named, are official functionaries of the king. We've seen them addressed in a couple of different ways, and so they have they're the local authorities.
So my question is, though, they're hurrying to Jerusalem.
Yeah, so they're not right
From-
there. From where? But Jerusalem, again, going back to the comment that from the perspective of Artaxerxes, this is the hinterlands, but he doesn't want it to be a headache in the hinterlands. And even within the province of Judah, right, the whole area, this isn't the metropolis of Jerusalem. Right, this isn't a bustling city where these people are doing it. You get the sense that this has got a feeling of out there hinterland hillbilly, even in the province of Judah, because the authorities aren't stationed there. This isn't Los Angeles. This is when the consular general has to come down to San Diego or Ramona.
How long a time from when the king of Persia said, go, take all this money, I'm gonna, we're all gonna make a big collection for you so you can go build your temple, till we get to the point of stop it, because, are we talking about a generation? We're talking about, 15 years? We're talking about 5 years? We're talking about 2 generations?
So,
Yeah,
I had
it
said-
seems like it just happened just a page before. That's why I say it.
Correct. I had said that I was going to look for, and I didn't do it, a list and dates of the kings of Persia. So I want to bring that. The Edict of Cyrus is in the 530s. Okay? Depending on what we take to be the year usually given is 537. We're probably about a decade later, and verse 24 is going to be right around 520. That is the second year of the reign of King Darius, which we can date pretty well. So we're now, so we're going to be in the ballpark of 15 to 20 years after they were given permission to come back, that we're going to have the serious, either the second start to build or the serious start to build, depending on how you tell it. But it's about a generation. Okay?
So I just was thinking, what were they doing for that generation?
Yeah.
It's like
this clearly isn't their
the-
full-time.
The Jews who went back to build, they started building, and now
Outstanding.
20 years later, they're being asked to stop. So in those 20 years, they're just hanging out.
They are trying to reestablish themselves in the places where they lived before. Remember the list?
The
Right.
place to read, the best, I think, we have a little bit of a reference here, not much, is the prophet Haggai. Because his complaint against them is specifically that they came back and they're not building.
And they're taking care of their own
Correct, they're
little
living.
fields and little
Yeah.
farms, and they're establishing themselves as immigrants back in a place where they used to know, or their parents used to know before, and they're concerned with growing things and praying for rain and doing all the things that people do on a daily basis.
Normal life.
Because that goes more along with the idea of building this city that might need a wall. If what Ruth is saying is we're in the middle of this, wild country, not really wild country, but
Oh,
untamed
yeah.
country.
Yeah.
So if what we want to do in our generation is take care of ourselves, even before we're building the temple, maybe the first thing we need to do is build that wall around us.
So I
But they
encourage.
didn't live in Yerushalayim, they lived around
Around.
it, because all
There's
the
nowhere to live.
agricultural country is right around it. And that's exactly what we were talking about yesterday, yesterday? Or the day before, Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Whatever. So the idea is that they're so, I can understand, they come back, they have to make a living, they have to survive. And Yerushalayim doesn't interest them that much,
Correct.
unfortunately.
And-
Especially when there are people who come and say, hey, I want to help you, and they say, no, we don't want you to help. What do they need this? They go back home and they start wondering about is the fig going to give me some fruit this year, or is the wheat going to grow?
So for those who want to read the critique, I think it's the second chapter of Haggai.
Yeah, there's only two.
There's only two. That's right. Read it,
Haggai, all of
and
them.
we'll come back to it. It'll be one of the things that we read moving forward after we get through the story the first time.
It's wonderful,
But one way to read this is an explanation for that gap in terms of why it wasn't built. And here, the people aren't to blame, right? As opposed to Haggai who's going to blame the people. Where's your zeal? Here, the ruler of the land, according to this version, right?
Yeah.
No, according to this version, the rulers of the land, all the way up to the king, say stop building. So, you know.
And you can
What are we,
think
rebellious?
If only they would let the other ones participate, they would have saved themselves the whole and
Correct.
so to speak.
So to speak. Who knows?
Who knows?
Right, because again, it's that edited style, it's that edited story, but to the extent to which it's a flowing narrative, if they said, sure, we'd love to have your help building the altar,
Yeah, you know
maybe
the
it
name,
would have
you know
happened much
topography,
different. Could be.
Come on in.
But by the way, they could have done that and then said, oh, as long as we have the altar built, can we sacrifice to Asherah too, as long as we're here? So, all right. The end of the chapter. Marilyn, you still reading? Lois, you reading?
24. The work of the temple of God in Jerusalem was thus halted and remained halted until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia.
Good. So this becomes the explanation of what all this has accomplished. It's accomplished telling the story that it started and it paused until it picks back up.
Again, pay attention. Avodat Bet Elohim.
Correct.
Nobody says anything about building a
walls.
city and a wall. Yes.
Correct.
We're innocent.
It's fantastic how the point of view is given through without describing it. The accusers talk about walls and the city. When the narrator sums up what happened here, he is talking about stopping building the Beit
temple.
Elohim. That's the only thing that's interesting to him.
But it could well be that in fact there was work going
Of
on.
course.
You know, particularly since they know that they've got hostile neighbors.
And you
Correct.
saw Har Habayit. I
But
mean, you saw it's a big hill, and you have to build things around it. And Yerushalayim was always behind walls. I mean, that's the
It
only way
makes-
that you can live there.
It makes the most sense to me in terms of the narrative, because one of the things that we're going to see is, as opposed to those who come before and those who comes after, the Persian period is a period of memory of what we would call religious tolerance, right? That is the way that Cyrus is remembered, and that's the way the Persian Empire, which doesn't mean that it's always jolly good, but therefore the issue isn't that you can't have your temple. The issue is you can't start thinking along the lines of rebellious kings. So we have a narrative here that's not that they're rethinking the religious tolerance, if that's the right term, of the Persian Empire, but it stopped not over the religious tolerance issue, but because, you know, it's a rebellious place that has a history of rebellious kings, and the Persian Empire wasn't tolerant of that. Remember, Second Temple time never gets a king, right? So there's sort of some measure of the religious tolerance will stay around for centuries, but not political, liberation. All right, good. Ballpark second year of Haggai, 520 BCE. So I have some dates for you, but I don't have the chart. I will find a good
Second
chart.
year of Darius, you mean?
Yes, did I not say that?
No, but I
I
thought you
said
said the
Haggai.
other one's 530.
The
you said
Artaxerxes was about a decade earlier.
537.
Okay,
Paul. So 537 is the year usually quoted for the Edict of Cyrus.
right.
Somewhere around 530 for the cessation of Artaxerxes, and 520 for the rebuilding in the second year of Darius.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't think you said 520.
Okay,
I
I may not
might
have.
have misheard.
527 or
What?
something.
Yeah, I thought.
No,
I may have misspoke. It's okay.
No, 520.
Between my accent, my lisp, and my misspeaking, it's amazing you understand me at all.
What?
Huh? So I passed out Josephus, right? I don't remember how much of the Josephus I passed out. What did I pass out? 11, 4, 2. So that's not the part, I don't remember exactly what I passed out for you.
When?
I don't know.
No, a couple of weeks.
Oh,
Okay, so this is. So this is the celebration. So before this, 2 chapters before this, is Josephus' account of what comes before. So I didn't give it to you, but anyway, Josephus is another account. Josephus, centuries later, a whole different world. The question of whether or not Josephus, what are Josephus' sources, if there are other Greek sources to it, or if he strictly has the traditional Jewish sources. Yes, another chapter. Chapter 5. Read Nabi.
Haggai Neviah.
You want to read more?
Okay.
You can keep going.
Haggai the prophet and Zechariah son of Iddo, the prophets, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and in Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel about them.
All right, so it's really, there are moments where the Bible clearly has a sense of intertextuality. Here we have a book in the Bible that's aware of two prophets, both of whom we have books associated with them specifically about this. Okay, it's not often the case that we get multiple accounts of the same things. This isn't the only one. There are a couple of others.
Okay, so that pronoun about them. So
The
who?
pronoun about them.
Yeah.
I don't have it in my book, so read it to me again.
Okay, Haggai the prophet and Zechariah son of Iddo, the prophets prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and in Jerusalem in the name of God of Israel about them. So they prophesied about the Jews.
So I would, rather than about them, I would say over them or upon them, meaning to them.
Yeah.
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 It's not in this translation.
Just I was just a general
So in other
question.
words,
Yep.
what they built was
Which we
inferior
need
to
some
what it
sage
used to be.
advice
I
on.
thought you called Bill Sage.
Yeah, well, I'm moving along
Actually,
now.
in Garlic.
Can you repeat
You don't
that?
have, don't pass
He hasn't asked the question yet.
The question is, I just find it, as I read number 4, go through it all, the narrative is not very clear as to what's going on here. Is this, how do you look at something? Why is the narrator, we have a temple being rebuilt, and then we have these guys say, let us help you. That's the temple, right? And they say no. And then these guys then do bribes and all kinds of things to block it. And then the next thing we know, they're talking about a wall being rebuilt, and that's the complaint. But it looks like they're already stymieing them on the temple, and then the wall is being built, and then they go to the top authority to stop them from doing that, and that's what we've been going. But it is confusing.
Sounds very clear to me.
Well, but it's
What you just told is a wonderful narrative.
the text is.
When I'm upset, it seems like they were upset about the temple. That was their prime focus, that they couldn't build on that. Nobody was talking about a wall
Right.
being built, and then all of a sudden the wall gets introduced in the letter.
And
nobody's talking about them building homes and building a
Correct.
wall.
And what we have is an account that, as narrative, is, besides the language being difficult and complicated, isn't as edited, stylized, doesn't flow, and isn't as clear as most of the biblical narrative. I don't think so.
So you would say that. Okay.
I would agree with you.
just-
I think that
that's what I was really
we
asking.
have a letter referred to that doesn't go anywhere. We have the second letter. We have a blurring of a subject. However we understand it, I don't. Compared to places, even to Chronicles, and there are those who believe that the author of Ezra is the same author who wrote Divrei Yamin, who wrote the books of Chronicles. I don't believe that the story flows as clearly and it makes as much sense as most of the other biblical texts.
That was really what I
And
was asking.
it's an interesting thing because the book of Esther flows. It's a beautiful little story. I offended one of my students last semester. Another colleague pointed out to me, he was part of a peer evaluation, that one of my students really complained because I said that the book of Esther was fiction.
And the person was.
And I wasn't open to the academic sources that argue for the historicity of, and so he was laughing, and we were, part of the problem being critiqued by one's students is, critiqued by your students. And there's value to it too. I don't want to poo-poo it altogether, but
And the setting is academia, and he was offended.
correct. Well, because there's a reason why undergraduates are
Somebody
undergraduates.
got offended if you said it in this
Right.
context.
No, but it was really lovely the way that the student wrote the comment as part of the evaluation, because the condemnation was that I didn't take into account the academic work, arguing in favor of it. And so if it was in a conversation, it's really easy. The question is, what academic work are you referring to?
Yeah, you can't.
It's like,
You can't. Yeah.
I'm
It's
sure
like
somebody
the-
made a career
It's
out
like
of
the
trying to prove
archaeologists,
their
correct. It's the
history.
archaeologists who have found Noah's boat.
Or still looking,
Right.
still
So,
looking for it.
so be it.
In all
Anyway,
fairness.
As Scalia might say, though, we were left with a lot of imaginings here to
Correct.
connect the dots.
but the point
Yeah,
being
but
that
I
the
think
book,
that's what makes
the
it
book-
so interesting. It's the intrigue.
I'm not arguing it's not interesting. No, let me just finish the point.
No.
As
no,
compared
I mean,
to,
the question of the flow of the narrative. I think that it's clearly understandable that if somebody wants to accuse somebody of something in front of a king, of course you can start inventing things and coming up with mices that never happened. We don't know that it's not true, by the way.
Correct.
But the Jews are interested in the temple. If they build a choma, also a wall, that's one thing. But even if they don't, why wouldn't their accusers come up with a totally fabricated
Right, but-
accusation?
again, we have
That's why I like the way
multiple
the story
accounts about what the people are or are not interested in. I find the story to be choppy. That it comes from the same general period, though it's earlier than the Book of Esther, which I find to be, gorgeous literature. I find the writing to be, it flows, it has intrigue, it develops. And there are many other places. That just happens to be another piece of Persian period biblical text to compare to. This isn't like that.
I was just thinking of your Esther evaluation. I had 30-some years of evaluations
From students?
that I had to read,
Yeah, but nobody ever accused the material that you were teaching as being God's word.
That's true.
Whatever it was, it might have been Madison, it might have been
That puts it at a
Jefferson.
much higher level.
Yeah, or if you came to class and you said, this is fiction.
Fiction. Right.
Well, if we're talking about Scalia's comments.
Yeah, I know, exactly. So,
Yeah.
Oh, you mean for fiction?
Fiction.
Yes.
or for God's word, for that matter.
Yeah.
God's word too.
Just wanted to be clear on that.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Moving forward. So, I
Yeah.
love the reference to prophets that we have their writings, and so forth. Okay, verse 2. Lois, you want to keep reading, or you want to give Harvey a turn?
Well, I went back because I'm ready. I want to do this.
You can have the good names.
I want to do it. I don't want Lois to feel that I'm not carrying my load. This is Zerubbabel?
Yes.
That's why he gave it to me.
Right.
You got good names.
Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Yeshua, son of Yozadak, began rebuilding the house of God in Jerusalem with the full support of the prophets of God.
Good. So, now we have, after that brief interruption, we have now what the work is going to be, and they're going to get going, and we're going to get the same question. We have now a new set of governors. We lost our commissioner and our scribe.
Can I ask a question about that, just because
Yeah.
of different translations?
Okay.
Okay, so in the new one, it says, with the full support of the prophets of God.
And what did
And
Oh.
in the old one, it says,
and with them
were the prophets of God, helping them.
That's a better literal translation. I don't always say the old JPS is better, but I would say that flows better from the Aramaic.
The imhon.
Yeah, imhon.
With him, and with him. And what's the difference?
Between helping someone and with their full support, helping is a more active, to me anyway, helping someone is a more active kind of role than is just, you've got my support to do this.
Correct. They're going to end up with the
In the
support
Aramaic,
of the
they have
king.
both. Tomchim otam and imhem.
Correct.
You have both words. Yeah?
If you say so, because I have no
That's
idea.
the Aramaic.
I believe you.
Sa'ad is support, and imhem is with them. Yeah?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's keep going.
More?
Yep.
Okay.
Bezimna.
At once, Tatanai, I love the names, governor of the province of beyond the river, sounds like
I
an
love that
Indian place. And Shethar Bozani and their colleagues descended upon them and said this to them: Who issued orders to you to rebuild this house and complete its furnishing?
Correct.
Complete its furnishing?
That's what the.
There's no word about a wall?
No.
No.
I'm sorry.
More.
And what
Does the old
Which is
JPS?
interesting because the old translation says, who gave you a decree to build this house and to finish this structure, which is very different than furnishing.
Yeah, well, it doesn't have-
Furnishing,
Oh,
yeah.
But
you're
what
right,
is-
you're right, you're right. The Aramaic doesn't
Right.
have a wall.
What is
It has to
so-
finish
somebody,
it.
Somebody overzealously
The
translated
and the
the
Hebrew?
Hebrew with Choma. Sorry.
What's
Sorry.
funny?
Stone says,
Baita dena libne ve'usharna dena leshaklena. Yeah,
and Stone says,
okay.
and to lay the foundation for these ramparts.
yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Usharna
Shul,
Shachlana.
Usharna is like Shul, which
is
is wall, and Leshachlena would be
To
to
finish.
improve on or to finish or whatever, or the rampart. So it's not really clear whether they're talking about the ramparts of
What
the
they say
temple
for
or the walls of the city. Yeah. So somebody zealously in Hebrew translated it.
Ushaya. Usharna.
Shall we go on?
Yes. You ready? No, it's 5 o'clock.
Oh,
Okay.
I love it.
Can I just ask one question, even though it might take us a minute over?
Yeah.
Just because I think it'll be easier to do it now than to pick it up next week. Just the next little sentence that says, "Then we said to them." Who's the we?
This one
I had the
says,
same
then they
thing.
said.
Says the
following
officials
today.
of, verse 3. That's the note at the very
It's-
bottom of
It's really a reiteration of the same thing that we just
Well, the
heard.
officials of verse 3. Yeah,
Not
see
only who
that,
gave you
yeah.
permission, but we want your names. Give us IDs.
Yeah, it seems like it's the same speaker.
Who gave you
But why
permission?
would they say, "Then we spoke unto them"?
Correct. I agree with you, but what they say only makes sense in the speakers of those who are coming to inquire or to pester.
And Stone
Right,
says,
but-
then they said, the following to them.
But I agree with you. Again, another example where I
Yeah.
think that the editing of the text.
A prose
It's
that is
choppy.
not, that could be re-edited.
Okay.
Could benefit
I
from
mean-
a
Alright.
good editor.
We're all taught it.